It's Friday. That means it's another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. As always, I'm here. I'm John. My son and partner Jeremy is here. How you doing today?
Good.
Good.
How about you?
I'm all right. I think we're going to talk politics today, mainly because there's politics to talk about. All right. Some of it's going to be repetitive, I'm sure, but here's what I thought I would do. I write for Forbes. We send those out. And I have written my piece on Forbes, which we're going to send out with the notification of this podcast. But at the same time, I thought we would do the podcast, and so they would get my point of view and then your point of view as well. And so we would have a kind of a thorough airing. All right? So this piece is called Let Joe Be Joe. And I'm not going to read excerpts from it. I'm just going to suggest what we're talking about. So we're at about a year and a quarter into the Biden presidency, and the mantra out there is that this is a failing presidency, that the president's opinion numbers, his approval numbers are down considerably, and that concomitant with that, the congressional generic numbers are going against the president's party. And I just wanted to share some of these numbers here. During this presidency, so far 15 months, 6.5 million new jobs have been created. That's the greatest year of job creation in American history. The unemployment rate has gone from 6.2% January 20th of 2021 to 3.6%. That's the biggest single drop in this time period in American history. Unemployment claims were at 18 million who were receiving unemployment when he became president. The number is now 1.42 million. That's the lowest number since 1970. The most significant economic impact legislation of any first-year president in American history, the child poverty rate, is the lowest rate ever as of 2021. There's been an expansion of 5 million Americans who've newly gained health insurance. Hunger has been reduced by 32%. He's had more judges confirmed to lower federal courts than any president since President Kennedy. Of course, the most diverse appointment and approval of judges to federal courts in American history. His cabinet is the most diverse cabinet ever, the largest investments ever in a power grid, electric vehicle charges, clean water, the largest investment, national and bipartisan plan to get safe and clean drinking water to all Americans, cleaner cars, first ever approvals of large-scale wind, and the most diverse administration in American history. Why aren't we hearing anything about this? And what is so stunning to me is that we don't even need to start with the premise that this is the most successful administration at this point in American history, because we know that there's inflation and we know that Americans are frightened. But I think that Democrats have a very powerful resource and they're not using it. And that powerful resource is the guy who was smart enough to get elected. I think Joe Biden, in many ways, is the right man for the time. Flaws, etc. But what Americans need, I think, is stability, gravitas, wisdom, someone who is moderate, someone who is authentic, who has a genuine middle-class background, someone who is empathic, and yet the dominant conversation is he's too old, he's losing it, there's the focus on gaffes that he makes, and that is supposed to show that it's the end of the world. And yet, if I were handling Joe Biden, I would say, let Joe be Joe. I think Americans liked it. 81 million liked it in 2020. Have at it.
Yeah, I mean, I am convinced that you should take over Jen Psaki's job. You would do a great job.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm joking, but so you have to go by official statistics, right?
They're the ones that are out there.
They're the ones that are out there, but why are Americans, and this isn't just conservatives, why are Americans miserable? Mm-hmm. Why are Americans getting poorer? If you, recently we were talking about the inflation rate, and not too long ago we were saying 6.5%, and then we were saying 7%, and now we're saying 8.5%. But at the end of the day, that's still official, okay? And so what happens if you take an older calculation of how the government used to track inflation, when they had a larger basket of consumer goods that they've recently cut out, which one has to say, well, why did they cut those out? Doesn't that lower the rate of inflation? Well, yes, it does. And so if you go by older models or older formulas, inflation is actually at 18%. And so we have an inflation by I would say, more accurate, using the more accurate formula, we have an inflation rate that I think maybe never ever before seen in this country's history. And so what that's doing is it's making everybody poorer. When you take into the interest rates right now, which I think somewhere are barely above 1%, and then you calculate the factor in inflation, we're actually in negative territory. We have negative rates. We have the potential for a looming energy crisis. Why? Because we are not energy independent. We are energy dependent. We have a foreign policy crisis. A lot of the world looks at America as the empire of chaos, the empire that loves to start wars. This empire starts more wars than any other empire that I know of in the 20th century and the 21st century, a lot of which Joe Biden oversaw when he was vice president, created a lot of chaos, created a lot of humanitarian disasters, a lot of deaths, a lot of destructions of entire nations under his watch with Obama. And now it looks to be he's trying to continue that. This will lead to World War III because of the meddling into the affairs of Ukraine, which will then boomerang back as the United States continues to sanction Russia. And as we continue to sanction Russia, Americans are going to pay for that because that's going to shut down global trade, that's going to hurt supply chains, that's going to drive prices up. So if we go by official data, which is meant to whitewash what's really going on, then things look good. But if you take a cold, hard-nosed look at it, it's not good. The United States appears to be a failing empire. And we should be focusing much more domestically, which, the political landscape can go and debate about what's the best way to do that. That's why we have these parties. I'm not going to get into what's the best way. But Joe Biden has, by my estimation, sealed the deal. What they say about empires, like what they used to say about the Ottomans, they were the sick man of Europe. A dying empire goes out like a dying dog, which means they get vicious. And that's what's going on here. And that's what he's leading. He's leading the ship. And I'll just leave it at that.
I don't disagree with any of that. Short-term politics, though, and that's unfortunately what we are stuck with talking, because you and I think over the long haul, kind of sense, there's a revolution taking place. There's a breakdown, and the failing empire is very much, a part of that narrative. But in the short term, here we are, latter part of April, there's an election. So suppose you were called to the White House to advise the president and his team for the November elections, what would you tell them to do? I mean, the strategy has got to be, you got to win. If they lose control of both houses of Congress, tremendous trouble, and it's the guy at the top, right? So, do you showcase Joe Biden? Do you cover up Joe Biden and put him on the shelf somewhere? Do you let him out only to certain crowds? Who do you focus on? What would you advise? And then after that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I would tell the Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you go? Because you've had a little better preparation.
All right. Okay. I recall there have been 3 times in American history when presidents have been in huge trouble. Andrew Johnson in 1866-67, a looming disaster. Here's a Democrat with a Congress filled with radical Republicans. Woodrow Wilson, following Armistice Day, and he wants to sell the League of Nations, and nobody's listening to him. And Harry Truman, on the verge of losing his first battle at election. He, of course, inherited the White House. All 3 presidents went on a barnstorming tour around the country and to drum up support. Andrew Johnson, let's dismiss that one. Poor guy was drunk every stop he made and got into verbal battles and assaults with members of the crowd who were heckling and harassing him. It was a total disaster, to the point where the radical Republicans won 3/4 of both houses. And then, of course, as you know, they impeached and almost removed the president. Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, a debilitating stroke, during that barnstorming tour, and was, let me say, almost never seen in public after that, to the point where it's not speculated anymore. It is known that his second wife, Edith Bowling Wilson, was in effect his guard and acting president. Harry Truman, give him hell, Harry. That was the success. Here was a guy who was way down in the polls, but he gave him hell. And he ended up not only winning by a hair, but he carried Congress with him as well. Would you advise? I would. A barnstorming tour. I still think that there is a measure of goodwill for Joe Biden, and I think his handlers are protecting him too much. I know he's an older man. I know there are signs of, hey, I see those signs myself walking down the street. But I would
about you or
about
other
me
people?
About me. I will. I would get him out there, and I would stick to a message. I'm the right guy. I have succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you saw the footage where he recently shook hands with somebody who wasn't even there.
Yeah, I did.
Seen it done. You're a long way from that.
No, I've seen it done.
But, I mean, okay, I'm going to go back to foreign policy because that's very important. It's very important. It was, of course, the lesson of our first president when he gave his farewell address. And boy, did he have foresight. I would say drop the neocons. The neocons have invaded the Democratic Party. Victoria Nuland, Bill Kristol, Samantha Powers, Susan Rice. More so, Nuland and Kristol are official neocons. There's no question about that. The other ones I've named have kind of become by proxy. I don't think that they are necessarily reading, who was it, Levi Strauss or whoever it was.
I doubt it.
But they act like neocons, they talk like neocons, and neocons are dangerous. We know that going back to the George W. Bush administration. Liberals were pretty much 100% in line with that. All of a sudden, Obama came along, and he started taking up the neoconservative agenda, and it was okay. Biden would have to drop that. That's impossible. He's not going to do that. But he would have a lot of success. I think that he would find a lot of Democrats would really be on board with that. Basically summoning the old anti-war sentiment of the left, the old new left. So that would have huge success. I think that would bring about broad support. We saw that that's how Trump was able to gain success, was by let's stop with the imperial wars. Let's focus at home. And so that could be one thing. I would say, I know this isn't really going to happen. I know the Democrats are way too much invested in Build Back Better and the Green New Deal, but they should consider energy independence. Listen, electric vehicles are not realistic. We did a survey here in central New York, and while a lot of central New Yorkers were okay with climate change, a climate change agenda from the state, when you drilled down to electric vehicles, I mean, it was like they wanted nothing to do with it. Why? Because they're expensive. And number two, I mean, this idea that by 2040, you're going to ban all non-electric vehicles, I mean, that is preposterous. The effects that could have on the average person are incredible. We're nowhere near the point where we can supply lithium batteries in electrical vehicles to 300 or 150 million Americans. We're not there yet. So,
but of course, there is this looming climate change. I know you and I have disagreements on that, but it's beyond climate change. It's now one United Nations report after another, a looming disaster by 2030.
Well, choose your looming disasters. And by the way, those predictions have been going on since the 60s. I mean, that all started with the Club of Rome. And they said, we were going to have an ice age. Well, the ice age never came. And then they said other things. It's constantly changing. The buzzwords are constantly changing. I mean, yeah.
Well,
to be able to, we can't predict the weather tomorrow accurately. How are we going to predict what the climate's going to be like by 2030? But that's another discussion.
That's another discussion. Okay. So, what would I tell the Republicans? They're leading. Okay. Once again, just to reiterate, Democrats need at least a 5-point lead in the generic question in order to hold on and to break even. And every poll that's out now has Republicans up, which means if Rasmussen has the Republicans up by 3, they're really up by 8. And we're talking about Republicans, at least as of now, winning back in House and Senate. What would I tell the Republicans? Hold on to the ball and run out the clock. Don't take wild 3-point shots. Don't dribble behind your back and do no-look passes that could be stolen. Be cautious. Don't go out on a limb. And as you and I sit right now, that is precisely what they're doing. They're getting into a piss-in match with Disney. All right, regardless of the fact that some conservatives may love that, as you have mentioned many times, the battleground is among independents. They are, before cases get to the United States Supreme Court on the hearing of Roe v. Wade, they have gone way over now in states like Texas and Oklahoma, Idaho, and others, where in effect banning close to all abortions as possible. No gay laws, banning of certain popular books, regardless of whether or not that may be popular among the conservative base. There are districts that they can win like that. I'm not so sure that battleground states can be won like that, or that the presidency of the United States can be won like that. But in the short term, I think this is high-risk politics. I would tell them to shut up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. I think populism is effective in that when people sense impending doom, or when voters are fearful, when voters are living paycheck to paycheck,
Yes.
which we know, when 80% of Americans tell us that they felt the effects of inflation, populism is very successful. But when it goes too firebrand, it can undo itself. I'm not a big fan of Ron DeSantis, but I have to say to his credit that I think there's been a very big misunderstanding about this no say gay bill or no gay bill. My understanding of it is that actually the text of the bill itself doesn't say anything like it within it. Mm-hmm. What the bill, which it's been incorrectly named, what it really is that in Florida, you can't teach about, I don't know whether you call it gender identity or where you call it LGBTQ or homosexual, whatever it is that's in the bill, you can't teach about that until fourth grade. Mm-hmm. So that there's don't say gay and not being able to teach LGBTQ perspectives until fourth grade are two different things. So I don't know if they're shooting themselves in their foot. I think what they're doing is they're capitalizing on independents who are starting more and more to agree with conservatives and Republicans on issues like critical race theory and bringing in LGBTQ very early on in childhood education. And so I think they're capitalizing on that opening.
All right. Remember, however, that often the key to understanding legislation is not the arcane language that's in the bill. It's how it is disseminated among the public, what it enables, and then ultimately what it unleashes. Mm-hmm. So I'll use as a rather opposite example the Emancipation Proclamation. On paper, it didn't free one single slave. It was symbolic. What it caused, according to W.E.B. Du Bois, was a general strike among slave labor throughout the Confederate States. Mm-hmm. What it unleashed undid the Southern economy. In that sense, then, it was a brilliant strategy, even though on paper it didn't really do much of anything. And I think what's happened here in the Don't Say Gay is that I don't know that anybody could quote you verbatim what's in that bill.
Well, I think what's happening is that the dissemination is coming from the major outlets who are defining it. And so that's what's unleashing, is that it looks to be that the major outlets haven't really read the bill. Because if they did, they would be reporting saying, Florida cannot teach about this subject until fourth grade, which is not really revolutionary or radical.
But the impact is quite different. So I would tell the Republicans to tamp it down, slow it down, because there is still the strong potential that they could blow this.
Of course.
We air it out?
Yeah, we agreed.
So we're going to send out the podcast. We're going to send out the Forbes piece, and we'll see you. I'll see you later on today, but we'll see you all next week.